guys, balik lagi di Casper Daily. Hari ini saya sudah berada di tengah-tengah kota Chicago lagi guys. Jadi hari ini saya akan jalan-jalan sedikit mengelilingi kota Chicago. Atau kemungkinan kita naik ini ya, water taxi ya. Jadi kita keliling-keliling dengan naik itu perahu itu guys, yang gede itu guys. Jadi seperti apa keseruannya, tonton terus channel ini, jangan lupa subscribe, like, and share, dan hidupkan lonceng notifikasinya guys. Oke guys, lanjut. Seperti yang kalian lihat guys, jadi water taxi ini akan mengajak orang-orang atau wisatawan untuk berkeliling kota Chicago karena kotanya dikelilingi oleh sungai guys. Jadi bisa melihat keseluruhan seperti apa kota ini dari atas sungai guys. Kita akan coba mencari ini ya. Kita akan beli tiket ya buat bisa naik ke atas perahunya guys. Oke guys, jadi saya sekarang beli tiket. You can grab my card. Sekarang saya udah beli tiket guys. Nanti saya mau naik perahu jam 5 sore. Thank you so much. Jadi tiketnya saya sudah dapat. Harga tiketnya sekitar $50 ya. Plus tax jadi 54,49 guys. Oke guys, jadi kita akan berangkat jam 5 sore. Jadi saya masih ada waktu sekitar 45 menit ya buat menunggu ya. Jadi kita akan lihat-lihat dulu sekitar sini. Habis itu kita akan naik perahunya guys. Jadi stay tune terus di sini. Thank you guys. Nah, di depan kalian ini guys, ini adalah Apple Store guys. Tepat berada di pinggiran sungai. Ada Apple Store. Jadi ramai banget di sini guys. Seperti yang kalian lihat, di dalamnya itu adalah Apple Store. Jadi banyak orang yang antre untuk melihat-lihat. Nah, ini logonya nih. Untuk melihat-lihat HP atau iPad atau laptop terbaru. Kita lihat segini guys. Nah, jadi ramai banget ya orang di dalam sini guys. Jadi yang seperti kalian lihat guys, ini ada iPhone 14 Pro Max ya. Jadi kalian bisa coba-coba, bisa lihat-lihat kameranya seperti apa. Semuanya bisa dilihat di sini guys, bisa dicoba-coba ya. Ini ada iPhone Pro saja. Ada yang 14 Plus dan lain sebagainya guys. Jadi kalian bisa cobain, bisa lihat-lihat dulu sebelum kalian membeli. Nah, di sini juga ada laptop guys. Jadi ada MacBook Air. Jadi kalian bisa coba-coba guys. Mau lihat apa bisa di sini. Nah, jadi seperti ini guys. Apple Store-nya gede sekali di sini. Nah, ini ada iPad Pro. iPad Pro Plus juga dengan pensilnya. Jadi kalian bisa coba-coba dengan pensil gini ya. Jadi gitu. Jadi guys, kalian bisa lihat-lihat, bisa coba-cobain, ada jamnya juga. Kalau mau beli silakan dipilih guys. Kira-kira mana yang cocok buat kalian. Nah, ini jamnya. Nah, di sini ada komputernya ya. Ada Mac, ada iMac-nya guys. Di sini juga ada case, ada berbagai macam aksesorisnya juga. Nah, tinggal pilih guys. Case-nya ada di sini, semuanya original Apple ya. Ada case-nya juga, ada keyboardnya juga di sini guys. Jadi kalian tinggal ambil aja kalau mau beli ya. Tinggal ambil, kita lihat harganya berapa. $179. Jadi kalau kalian punya iPad, kalian bisa beli di sini guys, tinggal ambil aja. Lanjut guys, kita akan keluar. Kita akan jalan-jalan guys. Nah, cakep banget ya. Jadi Apple Store ini kalian bisa lihat gedung-gedung di sebelah sana, bisa sambil nongkrong ya guys. Walaupun nggak belanja, bisa ngadem dulu di sini. Nah, itu ada yang menjelaskan. Nah, ini ada workshopnya guys, jadi ada yang menjelaskan di sana. Jadi ada yang menjelaskan tentang sesuatu yang kayak aplikasi gitu ya. Layarnya gede banget guys. Jadi kalau ada launching HP baru, nanti launching iPhone 15 nanti di sini guys. Kan dijelaskan di sini dan banyak orang yang datang. Cuman sekarang belum keluar ya, jadi kita tunggu ya. Mungkin September Oktober keluar ya. Oke guys, jadi sekarang kita akan menuju tempat perahunya guys. Jadi orang masih pada ngantre ya. Nah, banyak sekali lainnya guys. Nah, di sana juga ada orang main kano guys. Ya, kita lihat. Di sini juga ada penyewaan kano. Jadi kalau kalian mau main kano juga bisa di sini ya. Ini sungainya lumayan besar ya guys. Jadi semua aktivitas air bisa dilakukan di sini ya guys. Jadi kita akan mengantre di sini. Nah, ini orang-orang yang baru selesai dari naik perahu dan kita masih akan mengantre di sini guys. Oke guys, jadi antriannya panjang sekali hari ini. Kita masih menunggu. Masih ada 10 menit lagi buat kita naik ke perahunya guys. Jadi kita harus bersabar ya. Orang pada ngantre guys. Nah, antrian ke depan dan ke belakang masih panjang ini. Jadi harus tetap bersabar ya. Oke guys, kita akan segera naik ke perahu. Jadi orang masih antri ya. Kita akan jalan-jalan melihat Chicago guys. Mudah-mudahan hari ini seru ya. Ini dia perahunya. Kita akan naik di perahu ini guys. Jadi enternya di sini, perahunya sebelah sini. Itu ada orang party guys, party di atas perahu guys. Nah, seru banget seperti itu. Mereka bisa party-party kayak gitu ya. Nah, nanti kita akan naik perahu ini guys. Sekarang masih mengantre, jadi kita sabar dulu. Sekarang udah jam 5 guys, tapi masih panas ya. Jam 5 masih panas, matahari masih menyengat banget ini. Saya lupa bawa kacamata lagi guys. Nah, jadi ini petugas yang ngecek tiketnya guys. Jadi ada banyak ya jasa dari perahu ini ya, bukan hanya ini aja ya. Kalau ini namanya shoreline sightseeing. Thank you man. Oke guys, kita udah check-in. Kita tinggal naik ke perahunya guys. Jadi ini petugas-petugasnya. Jadi kita akan naik di sini dan turun juga di sini. Nah, seru banget guys. Kita akan menuruni tangga dulu sampai masuk ke perahunya guys. Hi. Thank you. Jadi halo. Oke guys, lihat guys. Masih panas. Kita akan cari tempat yang bagus ya. Kira-kira di sebelah mana ya guys? Mungkin di depan ya. Mungkin kita akan cari tempat di depan guys. Jadi kita duduknya di sebelah aja ya. Atau di kursi ya. Oke guys, jadi kita sudah berada di perahunya ya. Jadi bisa milih tempat duduknya di mana aja. Saya lupa bawa kacamata guys, jadi panas banget jadi. Matanya silau. Nah, jadi kita ada guide-nya juga guys.
She's perfect in every way. She serves a variety of cocktails, mixed drinks, 6 different types of beer on tap, wine, soda, juice, water, chips, and pretzels. And everything at Elise's bar is credit and debit only, no cash. Go past Elise's bar on the right-hand side. Currently on the dock side, you'll find our restrooms.
We will be admiring what all the buildings are wearing and learning a little bit about the designers behind them. And we also get to explore the evolution of architecture. But we're moving fast, so we're going to kick things off. Lights, camera, action! We begin on the right-hand side of the river at this beautiful white ornate building with the clock tower. This is the Wrigley building, and that's the same Wrigley as Wrigley Juicy Fruit Chewing Gum and Wrigley Field. The clock tower here is modeled after La Giralda, a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. This whole building done in a style called Spanish Revivalism. In the late 1800s and very early 1900s, American architects still hadn't quite figured out what they wanted their own aesthetic to be. And they were still looking towards older European buildings for inspiration, kind of copying and pasting those designs over here in America in the most American way they knew how, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. On the outside of the Wrigley building, there are over 250,000 uber delicate terracotta tiles. Terracotta is very inexpensive to manufacture, but it's very delicate to the touch. And those tiles to this day still have to be cleaned by hand with just soap and water. Let's meet the next door neighbor to the Wrigley building. Directly in front of the boat, we're looking at Trump International Hotel and Tower. And when you look all the way up, you'll see it's got 1, 2, 3 different setbacks, or patio terraces as they're also called. Now these setbacks are actually the same height as other buildings in this neighborhood. The shortest setback on the right is the same height as the Wrigley building just next door. The middle setback on the left is the same height as the Jewelers building on the left-hand side with that ornate dome across the river. And the third tallest setback also on the right is the same height as the AMA Medical Plaza. It's the black box building behind Trump Tower that we can't see just yet. But this is our first example of an architectural style that we're going to see quite a bit of today on the river called contextualism. Site-specific designs that flatter the overall context. So the architect here isn't just plopping some random looking building down wherever. In his design, he's taking into account everything that's going on around it, not only in the natural environment, but the other buildings in this neighborhood as well. Trump Tower was completed in 2009. Lead architect here was a man by the name of Adrian Smith, the world's tallest architect. We don't call him that because he was tall. We call him that because he has designed some of the world's tallest buildings, including the current world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which actually looks very similar to Trump Tower. It's got a lot of those same kind of setbacks built into it, but it is about twice as tall.
Oke guys, seru banget hari ini guys. Jadi kita ada guide yang ngomong di depan ya, menjelaskan tentang gedung-gedung yang ada di sini guys, atau bangunan-bangunan yang ada di sini.
We're going to stay on the right-hand side as we meet the iconic, the twin, the corncob-shaped towers of Marina City. In the 50s and 60s, this area of the river was super industrial, very commercial. Hardly anyone lived downtown, and architect Bertrand Goldberg wanted to make it easier for people to do so. So he designed Marina City to have everything you would need to live all in one place. And here's how he did it. On the very top floors, there are pie slice or petal-shaped apartments. They start off really small by the door, and then they get wider as you go out. I heard they're actually very difficult to decorate. And then below that, there's a couple different levels of valet parking for your car. You gotta have an expert park that car, otherwise I know I would drive mine right off the edge. Then a complex with some restaurants, some retail opportunities. The House of Blues is now downstairs. And the number one thing that I look for whenever I'm apartment hunting, a place to park my luxury yacht, all the way down at the very bottom. And if you're a fan of rock and roll music, you might even recognize Marina City from the cover of the classic Wilco album, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. It's a local Chicago band. They rock. But if you're not a man over the age of 40, you may have never heard of them before, but they're very good. On the left-hand side, super reflective glass leads all the way up to that Greek temple shape up at the very top. This is 77 West Wacker, designed in a style called Neoclassical. Neo meaning new, classical meaning classical or old. And all that really means is that the architect of this building was also looking towards the past, but in this case, ancient Greece for inspiration for his design. He's really kind of clarifying it, making it more contemporary. In fact, we often call this building the Parthenon on steroids. It's got this bulked up, almost futuristic look. And I'll give you a fun fact about Ricardo Bofia, the Spanish architect of 77 West Wacker. When he designed his first building, he was actually only 17 years old, which I find personally offensive. I don't know what you guys were doing at the age of 17, but I was not designing buildings, okay? I think I was in a school play, which is just as cool, but I am a little bit biased. On the left-hand side, right up against the water, this area with the staircase and the trees. This is one of 5 distinct rooms of the Chicago Riverwalk. 1.3 miles of open, public, recreational space. Anyone can come down here and hang out. There are restaurants, entertainment, places to go kayaking and fishing. And while the idea for the Riverwalk was proposed to the city in the year 1909, it actually took Chicago over 100 years to finally build it. And when they did, it cost over $112 million. So while you're in town, I know it's gonna be hot, but come hang out on the Riverwalk, because how else will the city get its money's worth? Now next up, we're gonna cross underneath a double-decker bridge just in front of us, the Wells Street Bridge. That top platform, we might even be able to catch the L train going by on that top platform. If we don't see it now, we'll definitely see it later, so don't stress about that. But the train in Chicago is referred to as the L because most of the platforms are elevated up off of the ground. Wells Street Bridge is a great example of a classic Chicago-style bridge, which is also referred to as a trunnion bascule-style bridge. This is a French phrase. It really just translates to mean seesaw, and it helps describe the way the mechanisms inside the bridges work to help them raise and lower. All of the bridges in Chicago do raise and lower. In fact, we have the second highest number of movable bridges of any city in the world, second only to Amsterdam. Now on the right-hand side, we're looking at the Art Deco behemoth that is the Merchandise Mart. Art Deco style architecture is characterized by deep inset windows, long vertical lines, repeating geometric patterns, and metal finishings on the outside. Art Deco is a style that started here in America in the late 1920s. This is a time of decadent excess and wealth. People really wanted to show it off too, which is why they made the building so humongous. And we've even got this row of giant Pez dispenser heads on the outside, which is what I wish they were. There's no candy involved. They are busts of the titans of industry of Chicago's history, including figures like Montgomery Ward, who we'll talk about a little bit later, and Marshall Field, the department store. We're going to come back to the Merchandise Mart. We'll get an even better view of it from a different angle. But for now, we're moving right along, and we're about to cross into an area of the river called Wolf Point. And this is where all 3 branches of the Chicago River meet in the middle. We're going to make a right-hand turn so we can go up the North Branch for a few short minutes. But first, we'll meet this celebrity directly to our left. This is the Nuveen building, contextual style architecture. That curve along the front highlights the curve of the river just below it. Completed in 1983 and featured in the 1985 classic Chicago film Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This is the building where Ferris's dad works. Even more contextual style architecture just in front of us at River Point with its parabolic arches cut out of the top and the bottom. The arch along the bottom allows for the Metra and Amtrak train lines underneath this building to run unhindered. But if I'm honest, I like it for a far, far more basic reason. Doesn't it look like a giant Hot Pocket? Right? I knew I couldn't be the only hungry person on the boat right now. Oh, and speaking of being hungry, I can guarantee you that every building we've seen so far, and every building we're going to see after this next one, has been 100% vegetarian and vegan. But that is not the case for Fulton House, this red brick square building just directly in front of the boat. Fulton House is one of the oldest buildings that we have on the river, built in the late 1890s to be the cold storage facility for a meat processing company. So the whole building worked basically like a giant freezer. That company closed in the early 70s, and there's some pretty nice apartments on the inside now. But before they could turn Fulton House into apartments, they had to wait 3 whole months just for this building to defrost. It was basically a giant block of ice. And when they went inside to do the renovations, they found 4-foot thick walls stuffed full of horsehair and cork.
Oke guys, jadi itu tadi penjelasan dari guide tournya. Sekarang lagi break, jadi kita bisa ngobrol-ngobrol kecil di sini ya. Jadi seru banget guys. Walaupun panas, bisa melihat pemandangan seperti ini sambil menikmati suasana di sini. Saya lupa pakai kacamata guys, panas mata saya. Nah, sekarang mau muter, jadi kapalnya sekarang mau muter ya, muter balik lagi ke arah yang tadi guys. Jadi seperti itu. Jadi seru sekali guys. Kalau kalian bisa datang ke sini, kalian bisa menikmati kota Chicago ya dengan naik perahu ini, jadi kalian bisa tahu semuanya. Oke guys, nah ini kepala perahunya sekarang mau muter balik lagi ke dalam kota Chicago guys. Jadi pelan-pelan muter di sini. Tapi kalau perahunya tidak muter, bisa langsung ke danau guys, bisa langsung ke Michigan Lake atau Danau Michigan ya. Cuman ini karena sightseeing tour, jadinya balik lagi ke tempat awal tadi guys. Nah itu di sebelah juga ada yang lagi tour juga guys, dengan naik perahu yang berbeda. Jadi ramai banget hari ini, hari Minggu guys. Jadi besok itu adalah Labor Day atau hari buruh ya. Jadi besok itu libur guys. Dan warung juga kita tutup untuk besok. Nah ini buat orang kaya nih, naik cruise kayak gitu guys. Jadi di pinggiran sungainya itu benar-benar ditata ya. Nah seperti kalian lihat di sana itu ada penyewaan kano guys. Kalau kalian naik kalau kalian suka canoeing ya, jadi kalian bisa sewa juga di sini guys.
the north branch of the river, and we're starting to head down the south branch to see what's happening down there. But before we get there, we do have to cross again through the area called Wolf Point.
Nah, ini
And like I
jembatan yang
mentioned
udah
earlier,
kepake ya.
Wolf Point is where all three branches of the Chicago River meet in the middle. And where they meet, they actually form the shape of a giant capital letter Y. And this Y shape often gets stylized and printed on other buildings and structures all over the city. It's what we call the municipal device. It looks like a capital Y with a circle around it. And you might even be able to see it if you look off to the left-hand side of the river. It's built in to the metal hand railings that are right up against the water as we're going right by. You can really see it where that green construction fencing is. A capital Y with a circle built into the hand railings right up against the water. It's kind of like Chicago's version of a hidden Mickey, because you never know where else you're going to see it. I'll point out a building in a few minutes that also has that Y shape on the outside. But this area, I mean, this is really the trophy case of the Chicago River. You get these incredible 360-degree views, some really interesting technology in this neighborhood, and I want to specifically talk about the technology inside of 150 North Riverside. That's this building on the right-hand side of the river, and if you look to the base, you'll see it's got this Y-shaped cantilevered base. Now, the bottom of this building is only about 39 feet across, and it only takes up 20% of the plot of land that it's built on. Looks a little precarious, right? It's a tall building, and we're in Chicago, the windy city, so you might not be surprised to learn that most of the skyscrapers here do actually sway in the wind on a really windy day. Now, this sway is called drift, and there are three big ways that engineers try to counteract drift with their designs. And we're going to learn about all three, but we'll focus on just the one going on inside of 150 North Riverside. If you were to go all the way up, I think those people are getting married over there. Wow, congratulations! Not to interrupt them, but... okay, back to the architecture, you guys, come on. All the way at the very top floor of 150 North Riverside, you would find gigantic tanks of water. About 160,000 gallons of water inside these tanks, and they're calibrated in a way that when the building sways in the wind, the water in the tanks sloshes in the opposite direction and kind of swallows or dampens the inertia caused by the swaying building, which is why the tanks of water are called inertial slosh dampers. It's also usually a pretty good place to take a selfie because you get a good reflection of that up in those angled walls. So if you're looking up at 150 North Riverside and you see somebody up there wearing your clothes, don't freak out, it's probably just a reflection. No guarantees though, some of us do actually have any with them, so. Inertial slosh dampers are just one of three ways engineers counteract drift. We'll learn about the other two later when we have examples of them. But for now, let's meet our next celebrity, the Bank of America building, right here on the left-hand side. Currently, the tallest purely office building in Chicago. Stands at 817 feet tall. Also has some very interesting stuff going on at its base. There is an ordinance in Chicago that any new building built along the river has to have at least a 30-foot setback at its base. And the setback allows for there to be public access to the waterfront. And you can see here how the Bank of America building does it. The first three floors are set back 30 feet. The rest of the floors hang over. They take advantage of that extra space. They're supported by these metal-covered steel beam tripod legs, leaving plenty of space for people to walk by up at the top and for the cafe by the river down at the very bottom. Now on this tour, we also get to explore the idea of the evolution of architecture. Throughout history, each style has been directly influenced by all the ones that came before it. And we're really going to let that take center stage right now, because the next 5 buildings we're looking at were all built along the river in chronological order. And we're going to start on the right-hand side. We'll stay on the right-hand side for most of this. At the beautiful Art Deco 2 Riverside Plaza. Again, Art Deco's got deep inset windows, long vertical lines, The lines here often remind me of like a pinstriped suit, like maybe something they would wear during The Great Gatsby. And that's the time period we're talking about, late 1920s. Remember, decadence, excess, wealth, optimism about the future. But what happened at the end of the 1920s? The stock market plummeted, sent America hurtling into the Great Depression. And almost as soon as that was over, World War II began. And for nearly 30 years, almost no new office buildings were built in the United States, including right here in Chicago. People didn't need them. They didn't have the resources to build them either. And post-World War II, when people went back to work, they got a new, conservative, austere movement of architecture called Black Box Modernism. This first building on the right, this is Gateway Center 1, and its identical twin, Gateway Center 2, is directly next door. Now, I use the words conservative and austere to describe these buildings because of the way that they look. There's no ornate detail. It's all simple lines, sharp angles, really kind of harsh, dark colors. But this movement was founded by German architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. And you might recognize his catchphrase, less is more. He believed in the practicality and the functionality of a building over anything else. He thought a building was truly beautiful if it was doing only and exactly what it was built to do, no more and no less. He really didn't have time to sit around and argue about gargoyles. But at the beginning of the 70s, architects take one look at black box modernism and they're bored. They want to loosen up and get more creative, which first leads them into international style. This white box building on the right, this is Gateway Center 3. Great example of international style, a softening of, a transition away from black box modernism. So it still does have a lot of similar features, simple lines, sharp angles, but it's really meant to be very kind of timeless and actually sort of generic. You can find this style of building anywhere in the world where buildings are being built after 1970. International style, it's not tied to any one specific place. But at the beginning of the 80s, this is when we get contextualism. Remember, site-specific designs that flatter the overall context. Really comes out of this global attitude that shows up in the 1980s. Contextual style buildings are not only they themselves supposed to look beautiful, they're supposed to help everything else around them look more beautiful too. At the very end of the street, an example of that is Gateway Center 4 with that curve along the front. Again, to highlight the curve of the river just below it. And the color and the texture of the glass here is meant to mimic the color and the texture of the water in the river itself. So our time machine really begins all the way back at the Wrigley Building, European revivalist styles. And then American architects get their own style, Art Deco in the 1920s. Then they go conservative, austere, post-World War II, black box modernism. They get bored, they loosen up in the 70s with international style, and then follow it up in the 80s with contextualism. Now for any of my friends on board who are not from Chicago, you might not have any idea where on earth you currently are. But don't worry, I got up super early this morning and I put a giant "You Are Here" map on the side of 300 South Wacker, just for you guys. That red brick halfway up shows you exactly where we are on the river, and you can even make out the Y shape of Wolf Point directly above it. In fact, some of you might even recognize this building as Gotham City Bank from the opening sequences of the Christopher Nolan Batman film, The Dark Knight, starring Heath Ledger. Although the real name of this building is the Old Main Post Office. In the 20s and 30s, Chicago was the mail order catalog capital of the world. Remember those mail order catalogs? And they needed a massive post office to handle all of that incoming and outgoing mail. And at the time, there was no better architectural style than Art Deco with its deep inset windows and long vertical lines. About 4 years ago, an almost $1 billion renovation project turned this building into offices for companies like Uber, Walgreens, Pepsi. You can read the sign, bless you. And it's so big, the highway runs directly through the very middle of the building, and up on the roof, there's a 3.5 acre garden. 3.5 acres of tall prairie grass, tons of places just to kind of kick back and relax, and there are even a few basketball courts on the roof of that building. So, fun little glimpse into how the other half works. But I like my office. I think I have the best office in the whole city. Just a brief reminder, just because I see lots of people kind of standing at the back of the boat, you are welcome to stand, but just make sure that you're not blocking the view for anyone else. We also have a bunch of empty chairs up here in the first kind of 6 or 7 rows, so you're welcome to come up front too. I promise I won't bite unless you want me to. Just kidding. We're gonna head further down the south branch of the river, and I like to switch gears here. We've met some celebrities and we've heard some facts, but now we're gonna tell some stories. Because I know what you all are wondering. You're desperate to know, Stephanie, how did Chicago become this kind of walk of fame of architecture that we know it is today? And this is really the place to see and be seen if you're an architect. And there are 3 moments in history that led to that reputation. And the first one is the Great Chicago Fire. And I'll set the scene for you. It's 9 p.m. at night on October 8th, 1871, and a fire breaks out in the barn of Mrs. Catherine O'Leary. She was an Irish Catholic immigrant who lived in this area, and she only lived about 2 blocks in that direction off the right-hand side of the boat. We know for a fact that the fire started in her barn, and there's one kind of big prevailing theory about how, and we'll talk about this in just a second. But you might be wondering, well, Stephanie, why wouldn't the river serve as kind of a natural barrier for that fire? But that night, there were 30-mile-per-hour winds whipping around the city that picked up that fire, carried it across the river in almost like a fire tornado, where it caught on to all the wood buildings that were here before and ended up burning for 3 days. And when that fire was finally contained, nearly 18,000 buildings had been destroyed, more than 300 people had died, and 100,000 people had been displaced from their homes. That's about 1/3 of the city's population at the time are now homeless. And people are angry. Well, what do people do when they're angry? They look for someone to blame. And they decide to blame, of all people, or rather, of all creatures, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary's cow. Yeah, they blamed her cow. They really wanted people to think that this cow had purposely kicked over that lantern because it wanted to burn down the city of Chicago. It's a little ridiculous, but if you're like me and you grew up around cows, listen, I've known some pretty vindictive cows, okay? So I believe it. And people did believe it for a long time. Catherine O'Leary and her cow were eventually exonerated for their crime, but not until 1997. So at that point, purely ceremonial. And the site where her barn once stood is now a firefighter training academy. So it's a pretty good reappropriation of that site. But this fire is simultaneously the worst and the best thing to ever happen to Chicago. Because what's more attractive to a group of up-and-coming architects than an entire city that has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up? And it's at this moment that architects from all over the country come here to Chicago to test out their new ideas, their new technology, and this is actually what leads to the invention of the skyscraper. But we're going to hop forward a little bit, 22 years in the future. It's now 1893. And this is the year that Chicago is chosen to host the World's Fair. And city officials really want to use this opportunity to show the rest of the world how great they're doing rebuilding their second city after this tragic fire. So they hire architect Daniel Burnham to design the campus for the World's Fair. Daniel Burnham gets a committee of architects together, and they create this almost like Venetian-style city near the south side of Chicago to be the campus for the World's Fair. And it's really successful. 27 million people from all over the world end up going through the turnstiles of the fair that year. And if you ask me, they were doing the exact same thing that I do whenever I go to the fair, which is eat a ton of really good food. And there was a lot of food that was created and introduced at, created for and introduced at the World's Fair that we still have around today, and maybe you have tried some of them, like Cracker Jack, cream of wheat, breakfast cereal. The brownie was invented for the World's Fair. They wanted a cake you could hold in your hand, eat while walking around the fair that wouldn't be too crumbly or too messy, and you wouldn't need a fork in order to eat it. So that's where we get the much denser brownie. You can still order this original brownie at the Palmer House Hotel here in Chicago. And this is also the time and the place that Pabst Beer wins their blue ribbon and becomes PBR, that I know we all know and love. Ugh, I love drinking it. I think college students across the nation at least rejoice at the World's Fair of 1893. Okay, we're having just as much fun as they are, right? Yeah? Now, like I said, this was so successful that a handful of years later, city officials go back to Daniel Burnham and they rehire him for a new project. They want him to revamp the entire city, make it look better and work better. Now, Daniel Burnham's a little nervous, but he does also know that he's a genius architect, and he accepts this challenge. He ends up creating what is now referred to as the Burnham Plan of 1909. This is one of the first comprehensive city plans in our nation's history. So much of what looks great and works great about Chicago comes from this plan. Now, Daniel Burnham was a student of an architectural philosophical movement called the City Beautiful movement. And he believed in beauty for beauty's sake. He thought it actually made us better people to be surrounded by beautiful buildings. So he uses this philosophy to inform a lot of his decisions. And here some of them are. Big one. He clarifies the grid system Chicago is built on. Makes it even easier to get around and navigate the city because it's built on a grid. He also introduces 18-foot wide alleyways so Chicagoans can tuck their garbage behind their homes instead of leaving it out on the street or in the sidewalk to get all stinky and smelly. And both the grid system and the alleyways are part of Daniel Burnham's larger plan to have Chicago be what he called a Paris on the prairie, this hub of art, design, and culture. And he's especially inspired by the city's motto, the Latin phrase urbs in horto, which means city in a garden. Daniel Burnham wants everyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, to be able to live within walking distance of a public park. And because of this, to this day, there are over 600 parks in Chicago, 246 different neighborhoods, and a lot of those neighborhoods are named after the parks that are within them. Our largest is Lincoln Park. It's 1.5 times the size of Central Park in New York City. Tons of fun stuff to do out there, including the always free Lincoln Park Zoo. But all this is just a very, very, very brief overview of some of the history of Chicago. The fire destroyed, the fair reanimated, and the plan beautified. How are we doing out there so far? Are we having fun, you guys? Yeah? Okay, sick. I like to do a little mid-tour check-in just so no one's out there suffering in silence. Okay, this building directly to our right, this is River City. And if this one looks familiar to you, it's probably because it was also designed by Bertrand Goldberg. That's the same guy who did the twin corncob-shaped towers of Marina City that we saw earlier on in the tour. Now, Bertrand Goldberg, he was a student of Mies van der Rohe, the father of black box modernism. But Bertrand Goldberg believed that since there were no right angles in nature, there should be no right angles in our architecture. And so his buildings have a much more kind of curvilinear shape to them, even just down to the shape of the windows. It's not really possible yet to be 100% accurate when it comes to no right angles in architecture, but he gets pretty darn close. Now, just beyond it is the Reed, R-E-E-D, brand new luxury residential building. In fact, it's so new that its first residents moved in just over 2 months ago. And, here at Shoreline Sightseeing, we often refer to Chicago as being a living museum of architecture. This whole South Branch is a great example of that. In about 10 years, there's going to be more residential buildings, more public parks, and there even are some plans to have the Riverwalk extend all the way down the South Branch to Chinatown, which I think would be awesome. When you're watching a red carpet event, who are some of the figures you might see? You might see actors, singers, athletes, maybe even, on a rare occasion, a member of the royal family. And I bet you didn't know, but we actually have our own royal family right here in Chicago, a king, a queen, and a princess. And I want to introduce you, but first, I need to actually know that you guys are ready to meet them. So can I see everyone's best kind of princess parade wave? I know we've all seen Princess Diaries, so we know how to do it. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, we're gonna meet them. Here we go, directly in front of the boat. This black box building with the 2 white antennas on top, that is the king of the Chicago skyline, Willis Tower. Now, some of you might know this building as Sears Tower, and we'll talk about why that is in just a second. Directly in front of the Sears Willis Tower is the Queen, 311 South Wacker, with her crown of barrels up at the very top. And just off to the right-hand side, Art Deco style, with that 30-foot tall statue of a woman on top. That is the Diva Princess, the Chicago Board of Trade. We're going to talk about her first because she is a diva. She demands our attention. Art Deco style, so again, she's got deep inset windows, long vertical lines. Even the statue on top is done in an Art Deco style. It's really streamlined, kind of futuristic looking. It actually looks a lot like the Oscar statue. But it's not a man, it's a woman. And it's not just any woman, it's Ceres, the Roman goddess of grain and agriculture. And she's on this building because they originally traded agriculture futures there. Now Ceres, her name, is where we get the words for cereal and cerveza, which my friend Elise is still serving at the bar on the lower half of the boat, in case you haven't said hi to her yet. All right, next up is Her Majesty, the Queen, 311 South Wacker. Her crown of barrels up at the very top is illuminated at night with a combination of 2,000 fluorescent and LED lights. Now those lights can actually be so bright that they have to be dimmed during bird migration season, because otherwise birds have and will mistake this building for the moon. And they get all discombobulated, throws them off their flight path. So we try to do the birds a favor, and we dim lights during the spring and the fall. She's octagonally shaped and wearing pink granite that comes to us all the way from the great state of Texas. So if anyone on the boat is from Texas, I just want to thank you for your contribution. I promise you, we do not take it for granted. One guy, so that's fine. One's better than none. All right, next up, we're meeting the king of the Chicago skyline, the apex of black box modernism. Tall, dark, and handsome, like I like all my lady men to be. It's none other than Willis Tower, also known as Sears Tower. Black box building, 2 white antennas on top, 1,451 feet tall, makes this the tallest building in Chicago. It is definitely going to sway in the wind a little bit. However, it does not have inertial dampers. It has the second way engineers counteract drift, a bundled base. When you look at this building, you can see 9 different smaller towers that are all bundled together at the base. And that gives it more stability at the bottom rather than at the top. But listen, I think Willis Tower could actually benefit from some inertial dampers because it can still sway up to 18 inches in any direction on a really windy day. In fact, some people say that when they're in Willis Tower, they can feel it swaying back and forth. Some people get a little seasick. And I've also been told that if you're in the bathroom, the water in the toilet bowls will slosh back and forth. You know, but that's a feature. That's what we call a Chicago bidet. So it's actually kind of fancy if you think about it. Now, Willis Tower has disappeared from view, but it is going to reappear above our heads in just a second, so we'll keep talking about it. When buildings are measured for their height, they are always measured from the lowest pedestrian accessible entrance all the way up to either the top of the roof or the top of a spire. But Willis Tower doesn't have spires, It has TV and radio antennas on top. Antennas are never included in the overall head of the building because they are not included in the original design. They're not structural to the building itself. They get added in later, and they serve kind of a completely different function from that of the building. But if you want a better idea of just how massive those antennas are, let's look across the street at Gateway Center 2 and 1. Each of these black box buildings on the left that we talked about earlier is 280 feet tall, the same exact height as the antennas on top of Willis Tower. Now in just a second, we're going to pass by this gap in the buildings here. This is giving us our final view of Willis Tower from the bottom to the top. So if you can take one last look at it, I would do so. We won't be able to see it for the rest of the tour, but I've got just 2 more facts I want to share about this building. And the first is this. We've actually had 2 men scale the outside of Willis Tower. The first was an American man, Dan Goodwin, in the early 80s. We call him Spider Dan because he did it while wearing a Spider-Man costume. And he also had big suction cups on his hands and his feet that helped him climb up the side of the building. Then he was followed in 1999 by a true sociopath, Frenchman Alain Robert, who did this, free soloed Willis Tower. He climbed up no ropes, no equipment at all. Both of these men did successfully make it all the way to the top of Willis Tower, and they were both successfully arrested the minute that they were done. So, don't add to your itinerary, it is not worth it. And after spending $800,000 on that map back there, we cannot afford to bail any of you out of jail. So, now lastly, and perhaps most controversially, we're going to talk about the name. Because if any long-time locals to Chicago heard me calling this building Willis Tower, they might be pretty PO'd. Most locals are very nostalgic. They're still calling it Sears Tower. But at this building, you don't actually buy the rights to name it. You lease them year by year. Right now, well, I'll go back a little bit. In 1973, that's when Sears Tower was completed to be the office building for the Sears department store. The company stayed until 1988. They got out of the building. The name stayed until 2009. And then after that is when the Willis Group, a London-based insurance brokerage company, started paying $1 million every year just to lease the naming rights on this building. They have about 2 years left on their lease. No news right now about whether or not they're going to re-sign it, but I can guarantee you no matter what it's called, nostalgic locals will still be referring to it as Sears Tower. But I'm getting sick of this, okay? It's confusing and it makes my job really hard. So I've just decided lately, I'm not even gonna bother. I'm just calling it Willis. And it's very simple spelling, right? W-I-L-L-I-S. And I think we're all smart enough to know exactly how that's pronounced. Sears. So keep that in mind for the future. Now we've got another huge Art Deco style building coming up on the right hand side, the Civic Opera Building, the second largest opera space in North America, the largest performing arts venue here in Chicago, has a fun little nickname, Insol's Throne. Charles Insol was a lead architect on this project, and he built the building to look like a giant chair. It has a low seat in the middle, 2 medium-sized armrests, and a tall back. And the story goes that Mrs. Insol was an aspiring Broadway actress, but she could never really make it into the scene in New York City, and they were hoping that the Civic Opera Building would become her kind of performing arts venue here in Chicago. And Charles Insol built the building quite literally with its back facing New York City as a larger metaphor for how Mrs. Insol was turning her back on the theater scene that would never accept her. I think she found a good community here. Even today, there's a great theater community in Chicago. We have over 250 different theater and performing arts companies. The Lyric Opera that works out of this building is just one of them. They do a really great combo of contemporary musical theater and some more traditional operatic pieces. They're really big, beautiful, lavish productions. They just finished West Side Story and are about to head into a production of The Flying Dutchman. Last summer, I saw Fiddler on the Roof at the Civic Opera Building. It had over 100 people in the cast. And still, they didn't cast me. But I'm not bitter about it, so. Now, I mentioned earlier how the Bank of America building is currently the tallest purely office building in Chicago. It stands at 817 feet tall. But that is, the key word there is currently, because any day, any minute, any second now, there's another building that's actually going to take the title of tallest purely office building from Bank of America building. And we'll see it directly in front of the boat, nice and tall, right in the middle over at Wolf Point. We're looking at Salesforce Tower. Salesforce Tower stands at 835 feet, so a little less than 20 feet taller than the Bank of America building, but it has not yet taken the title from Bank of America building because it has not been officially announced as complete to the public yet. They're still kind of tidying up some nuts and bolts on the outside, and when it is announced to the public as complete, Salesforce Tower will be the tallest purely office building in Chicago. We're playing it fast and loose here in Chicago, you guys. Things are always kind of changing and moving and grooving. Okay, we're crossing underneath the another double-decker, the Lake Street Bridge, just in front of us. In just a few months, a nearly year-and-a-half-long reconstruction project is beginning on the Lake Street Bridge. The city's going to completely rebuild this bridge. Just do it the best place on the river for you to get a really good picture of the merchandise mart in all of its art deco glory. We're going to go back to it, talk about it a little bit more. When the merchandise mart was completed in 1930, this was the largest commercial building in the world. But would you believe me if I told you, truthfully, that today, it's not even in the top 10. When the Pentagon was built, that's what knocked the merchandise mart off of its throne as largest commercial building. It's still pretty big though. It's got 25 floors, 43 elevators, has nearly 4 million square feet of space on the inside. It even has its own train station. You can take the L train Brown line from the merchandise mart all the way up to my house. If you guys want to hang out later, but I am going to be here for a while. I have 2 more tours after that, so just keep this in mind. At one point, it even had its own zip code, one zip code just for the merchandise mart. Today is a little bit more generous. It shares its zip code with the other buildings in this neighborhood. And my favorite bit of info about the merchandise mart is this. Just the front of it, the part that we can see right now, is 2.5 acres large. It's massive. And the city makes good use of it because during the summer, they treat it almost like a giant movie screen. You can come down to the Riverwalk every single night at 9 p.m. and watch a program called Art on the Mart. Animated art is projected onto the front of the merchandise mart. Some music they play, and it's like watching a short film on the front of this building. They work with a lot of really cool local Chicago artists, sometimes even the Art Institute itself. Now as we come around the bend in the river, go ahead, follow my finger to that dark glass box that's built into the wall of the Riverwalk on the right-hand side. That is the $8 million projector system, and it uses lasers to calibrate exactly where the light should be shown on the front of this building, doing so in a way so that none of the light leaks in through any of the many windows. So you could be working here late at night and you might not even know that there's a light show happening. Art on the Mart is the country's largest free public art installation. It's happening tonight, tomorrow, the night after that, the night after that. Totally free right down here at the Riverwalk. But really quickly, before we leave this neighborhood, I like to point out these metal poles that look kind of like they're growing up out of the water. Those are actually part of some fish hotels, floating habitats for the fish who live in the Chicago River. There's a local environmental group, the Friends of the Chicago River, who are working really hard to improve the overall health and quality of the water. And they're doing a good job. In the 70s, only 10 different species of fish dared to live in this water. And today, almost 80 different species live here. It could take me a while to get in there and count them all by hand, but I finally got it done. I'm a pretty good swimmer, so. On the left-hand side, this beautiful red brick building with the clock tower, this is the Reed Murdoch Center, built in 1914 to be a grocery warehouse. Today, it's the office building for the Encyclopedia Britannica Company. And it's probably the most lopsided building in Chicago because in the 20s, LaSalle Street right in front of us, part of this bridge, actually had to be widened. So the entire left-hand side of the Reed Murdoch Center was demolished. They widened the street and then built the building back up to match. And today, you can only really tell that it's lopsided if you look to the left-hand side of the clock tower. And I'll point it out once we get a little bit closer. But to the left-hand side, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays of windows. And to the right-hand side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is a pretty impressive feat of engineering, if you ask me. Now on the right-hand side, this shorter brown building with the number 55 in large type up at the very top, this is what I like to call the Danny DeVito building. Short, squat, with a ton of personality. And look at the guy, come on. He's hanging out between two beautiful supermodels, just like you know he would. I told you guys we'd see some celebrities on this tour. Now, 55 West Racker, as it's actually called, is the only example of an architectural style called brutalism that we have on the river. Brutalism is kind of the muscular cousin to black box modernism. It uses really heavy raw materials, specifically concrete. Institutions of a strong moral standing love using brutalism, including college campuses, police stations, courthouses, and in this case, the Lakeside Bank. Just next door to the left is 35 West Wacker Drive, now home to the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency. Alternating black and gray tile give it this almost pixelated quality. And even if you think that you've never before heard of Leo Burnett, I can almost guarantee you that you're familiar with their work, because this is the ad agency that gave us classic characters like Tony the Tiger, the Keebler Elves, and the Jolly Green Giant, among many, many, many others. We're going to stay on the right-hand side for a little while longer and just head down the street and look up. And you'll see this ornate dome on the very top of the Jewelers Building. Now there's a lot of hot gossip about the Jewelers Building, and I'm here to put those rumors to rest. Many people think that notorious gangster Al Capone used to hang out in the nightclub that was once in the dome on top of the Jewelers Building. Well, we don't actually have any evidence of this. So if you want to know where Al Capone really did hang out, we know it for a fact, I will tell you. I will give you the inside scoop. But you have to ask me after the tour. I'm not giving it away that easy. Come on. I'm not a snitch. But I will. You ask me after the tour. Just down the street from the Jewelers Building is my personal favorite, the beautiful green and gold Art Deco style carbide and carbon building, built quite literally as a protest during Prohibition. You won't let us drink champagne? That's fine. We'll just build a giant bottle of it to loom over the city. Green terracotta tiles to mimic that green glass of a champagne bottle that is a real gold leaf up at the very top. That gold leaf is so thin, it's 1/5000th of an inch, which is just half of the thickness of saran wrap, which is pretty cool. Still on the right-hand side, as we come out from underneath the bridge, we'll see this very ornate, almost rocket ship-looking building right here in the middle. This is Mather Tower, Chicago's skinniest skyscraper. The base of the building is 100 feet by 65 feet. The penthouse, 9 feet across. 1920 zoning laws required that penthouses could be no larger than 20% the size of their base. Just next door to the left is the London Guarantee Building, which is now home to the London House Hotel. And just above that logo, you'll see the glass balconies of the London House Rooftop Bar, which is the second highest rated rooftop bar in the world, right here in Chicago. Incredible views of the river and the city. Chicago has a lot of really great rooftop and patio bars and restaurants, so if you need any other recommendations, let me know after the tour. On the left-hand side, just past the Wrigley Building, is the beautiful French Gothic Revival-style Tribune Tower. Formerly home to the Chicago Tribune, it's now, you guessed it, more luxury apartments. French Gothic Revival style, because the top of this building is modeled after a Gothic cathedral in Normandy, France. And the design for Tribune Tower was actually selected from a nationwide contest. Robert McCormick, who owned the Tribune, wanted to have the most beautiful office building in the world. And he invited architects from all over the country to submit their designs. Some really weird, futuristic things were submitted, and he actually ended up choosing something on the far more traditional side. another European revivalist style. But I think the guy got exactly what he wanted. One of the most beautiful office buildings in the world. Just in front of Tribune Tower, it's none other than the Apple Store. And this building does have some historical significance. When the founding father of our city, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, built his home here, he actually built it in the same exact location where the Apple Store now stands. And if you join the nearly 40,000 people who cross over the Michigan Avenue Bridge every single day, you'll see a bust of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. So you can see for yourself just how devastatingly handsome he really was. We're going to stay on the left-hand side and look up over our other boat and see that recognizable peacock-shaped logo on the very front of NBC Tower, which is built to look just like 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. Now that is a spire above the logo. It is not an antenna. Spires are purely aesthetic. That means they serve no function other than to look cute and be tall. However, they are included in the overall height of the building because they're included in the original design by the architect, who in this case is actually our old friend, Adrian Smith, the world's tallest architect, who also designed Trump Tower, which is now behind us. But he's not the only architect who gets to have two massive skyscrapers that he designed hanging out just down the street from each other. Jeannie Gang gets to do that too. She's kind of the it girl of the Chicago architecture scene. And if we look just behind the brown box James Hardy building, look just behind it, you'll see the wavy balconies of Aqua Tower designed by Jeannie Gang. Jeannie Gang loves her kind of organic waves and shapes. The balconies here are meant to mimic rock formations out in southern Illinois. And I love Jeannie Gang. How could you not? She's a genius. Literally, she won a MacArthur Genius Grant in 2015. And she was selected just a few years ago to be in charge of the $8.5 billion redesign of O'Hare Airport. Yeah, that's billion with a B. Well, we're going to check out kind of her magnum opus, at least so far in her career, on the right-hand side of the river. 1, 2, 3 beautiful undulating towers of the St. Regis Hotel. Now the hotel is just in the bottom floors of this building, and despite the fact that the St. Regis was completed in early 2021, the hotel only opened a little over 3 months ago, so just the beginning of the summer. So now you can finally stay in any one of its 196 different rooms. But if you're looking for something a little bit more permanent, you can purchase any of the luxury residences that are available in the two taller towers on the right-hand side. And we'll go over pricing and stuff a little bit later at the end of the tour. I don't want to freak anyone out too much. On the outside of the St. Regis, you can see 6 different shades of gradient blue and green glass. Really great metaphor for how Jeannie Gang really is kind of shattering glass ceilings. The St. Regis, while this is the 3rd tallest building in Chicago after Sears Willis Tower and after Trump Tower, this right here is the tallest building in the world, designed by a female architect. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. Chicago wins feminism yet again. One more thing we want to share about the St. Regis, but I like to save it for when we're headed back in this direction at the end of the tour. So we'll come back here in just a few minutes. But for now, we're headed out towards Lake Michigan, towards Navy Pier. We're going to cross underneath the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Lakeshore Drive Bridge, named after the founding father of our city, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. Earlier today, Lakeshore Drive, including the bridge, was closed to cars for an event called Bike the Drive. It's a fundraiser for the Transportation kind of Alliance here in Chicago, and no cars allowed. It's open just for cyclists. You guys, I did 25 miles on my bike today on Lakeshore Drive. So I'm pretty tired, but normally I do 0 miles on my bike, so I feel pretty good about that. Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, who the bridge is named after, he was the first permanent non-native settler to make his home in this area, a Haitian immigrant and a fur trader who moved to this area of the country in the 1770s to establish a fur trading post, which he did very successfully. And when he lived here, this area of the country was actually called Chickagoa, which is the Potawatomi word, the local indigenous tribe's word that means stinky onion, which describes the vegetables that used to grow on the banks of the Chicago River. So we all know New York City, right? The Big Apple. Well, who cares? They can have it. Chicago, we get to be the big, stinky onion. Lucky us. Off to the left-hand side, this beautiful black tri-lobed building sitting just at the base of Navy Pier. This is Lake Point Tower. Tons of celebrities have lived here, including Tom Cruise, Sammy Sosa, Kurt Russell, and Goldie Hawn. It's also the only private building built on the east side of Lakeshore Drive. When Montgomery Ward was alive, it was very important to him that the lakefront remain forever open, free and clear, so that everyone could enjoy it. People hated him for it. He spent millions of his own dollars trying to pass the city ordinance. That was some prime real estate. But now we're very grateful that he did, because now you can spend your free time on the 18-mile lakefront path. It goes all the way up to almost Evanston, with places to walk your dogs, ride your bike, go rollerblading, have a picnic, and you can even go swimming in many of Chicago's numerous public beaches. Just beyond Lake Point Tower is, of course, Navy Pier, one of Chicago's greatest cultural attractions. Navy Pier was also built as part of the Burnham Plan of 1909, originally named Municipal Pier and renamed to honor fallen Navy personnel after World War I. Tons of fun stuff to do out on Navy Pier if you haven't been there already. The Children's Museum is out there. The Ferris wheel is up and running. Chicago Shakespeare Theater is doing a really great production of Beauty and the Beast right now. And if you have loved learning about Chicago and love being on a boat, you can do it all again. I recommend taking our Skyline Lake Tour. Takes you out onto Lake Michigan. This is a 40-minute tour. You get to see a bunch of buildings and landmarks that we don't actually get to talk about on our tour today because we can't see them from here. And we're running a really good deal on those tickets right now. Anyone who has purchased a ticket to an architecture tour can get 60% off of their Skyline Lake Tour tickets, making them $12 for adults, $4 for children. And you don't have to use them right away. You can, if you buy them now, you can use them anytime between today and December 31st, because we will be here. But we're not going to gatekeep the skyline from you. That sun is pretty darn bright, but we've got a beautiful view of the skyline going on just behind us right here, right now. Captain Rob is already turning the boat at an angle, so you'll get an unobstructed view of the skyline. We're going to hang out here for a few more minutes before we finish up our tour. I'm going to hop off the mic like I did before, so if you have any questions, please let me know. And this is your last chance to get a drink from Elise downstairs at the bar or to use any of the restrooms. We do not have a public restroom once you exit the boat back onto the dock, and we ask that you do not wait until the boat has docked to use the restroom. We're on a tight schedule. We've got a very busy day, so if you need to use the restroom, do it now. If you need any help taking a photograph, please holler at me or your neighbor. Ask me any questions you might have, and then in just a few minutes, we'll be back on the main branch of the Chicago River. We got a few more celebrities to meet, and then we will call it a wrap on our red carpet cruise. Thank you.
Oke guys, jadi itu tadi acara kita jalan-jalan di Chicago, naik perahu. Acaranya seru sekali dan guide-nya menjelaskan semua building tempat ada yang di sini dengan sangat-sangat bagus sekali ya. Penuh dengan history dan story about kota Chicago ini ya guys. Jadi mudah-mudahan next time kalian bisa datang ke sini biar kalian juga bisa menikmati seperti apa kota Chicago guys. Jadi terima kasih banyak untuk hari ini. Jangan lupa subscribe, like, and share, dan selalu nyalakan lonceng notifikasinya untuk mendapatkan video berikutnya dari Casper Daily guys. Thank you so much. Tetap semangat. Thank you guys.